Hello and welcome to a 360-degree outlook on the global security landscape. Now, this is a Wall Street Journal custom event brought to you by our sponsor, NETSCOUT. I'm Philippa Leighton-Jones, Global Editor-at-Large and anchor at The Trust, the creative consultancy and studio of the Wall Street Journal and Barron's Group. Now, as is customary, a few housekeeping rules before we begin. The most important one, we'd love to have you participate in this session in our audience Q&A. So please submit your questions in the box at the bottom of the video screen. We're going to cover all questions in the last 15 minutes of the session, and I'm going to bring both speakers back for that part of proceedings. In the meantime, please feel free to connect with fellow attendees in the chat panel to the right. If you encounter any tech difficulties, please take a look at our tech tips by clicking in the small question mark on the top right of the site. Now, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Michael Daniel, President and CEO of Cyber Threat Alliance. This is a cybersecurity nonprofit that helps improve information sharing about cybercrime and other threats. Mr. Daniel spent over 20 years working for the United States government and served as cybersecurity coordinator for President Obama from 2012 to 2016. Now, right before we get started with Michael, I'd like to start off today's conversation with a poll to our audience. So please add your vote by clicking poll below the video screen, just next to questions. And what we're asking you today is, if your organization had a cyber breach, are you instructed on what to do? Simple yes or no answer on that. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me. I really am excited to be here.
Well, it's great to see you. And I'm going to get your view on that poll question in a second once we get the results. But perhaps what we should have started off by talking about is when your organization has a cyber breach, are you instructed on what to do, right? Because it's often a matter of when and not if.
Unfortunately, that's true. And just given the volume of malicious cyber activity that's out there, from ranging from what nation states do to cybercrime, there's a high likelihood that at some point your organization, your business will experience some sort of cyber incident.
Right, exactly. Now, what do you expect that this poll is going to show us?
Well, I think it's going to show kind of a mix. Some organizations have actually started to get pretty sophisticated in how they think about, cyber incident response. Others have not really given it any thought and are kind of in the mode of, I just hope it doesn't happen to me. So I would expect quite a spread across the spectrum.
And as we wait for these results, let's just talk about when a breach happens, right? It's not always easy to know who you talk to and how you handle it, and dealing with the legal implications and everything that comes with it, right? Like the communications proceedings, talking to your HR department, for example, can often take longer than the forensics on the tech itself. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Most people, when you talk to them about incident response, about cyber incident response, they think in terms of the technical aspects of it. What happened, what data was accessed, and what has actually happened to our systems? How long is it going to take us to get back online if we've been knocked offline? What's actually happened? Mm-hmm. And that is a big part of it. But when you've actually suffered a cyber incident, there's all these other ramifications that are included. For example, how do you talk to your workforce and tell them if you've got, if you're more than just a small business, right? How do you communicate with your customers right, and inform them? What do you tell them? What are your legal obligations? If you're a regulated entity, do you have to talk to your regulator? How do you do that? And all of those things often turn out to be far more complicated than the technical aspects of what has happened.
Absolutely. Well, look, the poll results are in, and it's saying 87% of our audience feels like they are instructed to know what to do if there is a cyber breach, which is heartening, right? That's great. I wonder if we were able to dig into that a little bit. You know, are we talking about you'd know what to do in terms of the technology aspect of proceedings, but do you know then how to sort of spread the word? And I want to come on to that a little bit with you in a second, because this is a pretty holistic picture, and we're talking about changing the mindset here when it comes to sort of a cyber breach, let's call it rather than attack as such. So I want to talk about what your work and what you've been doing with the Cyber Threat Alliance, and how you think about sort of holistically sharing information. And it's really in its widest sense, because your work involves really pulling together intelligence from multiple agencies, whatever they might be, right? The organizations, the software providers, all sort of stakeholders within this sort of wider cyber threat picture. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is your agency does?
Yeah, so the Cyber Threat Alliance is a nonprofit association that is really focused on enabling cybersecurity companies, cybersecurity providers, those that provide cybersecurity services to others, to share that threat intelligence with each other, and to do that in both an automated fashion for highly technical data that you can move at speed, at scale, and standard formats, and to do it at a human speed, an analytic speed for more finished intelligence for that human scale interaction. And so really that's what CTA does. And our mission is to enable our members to better protect their customers and clients, to help various organizations disrupt what the bad guys are doing in cyberspace, and to improve the cybersecurity of the ecosystem as a whole. That's CTA's mission.
And how do you define success on that mission? Because at this point, it's not really just about keeping the bad guys out, but trying to figure out ways to be better than the bad guys, so that everyone's more prepared next time. What do the good guys need to be doing to make sure they stay one step ahead in all respects of the bad guys?
Sure. I mean, so one way that I talk about this is that you actually need to define success as preventing the bad guy from achieving their goals, whatever those goals are. Their goal is not to get into your network. Their goal is to steal money or steal information of some kind, or to cause damage or disruption to your organization. And so if you can prevent them from doing that at whatever point in the process that they're in, that's a win, right? So if you prevent them from getting into your network, all right, that's good. And that's obviously what everybody would prefer. But if you can't do that, but you can stop them from moving around very far, so they only get access to a small portion of your network and they can't get to the information that they want, or can't have very much of a disruptive effect, you still win. You know, if they can get to the information they want, but they can't get it out of your network, for example, you still win, right? If they get it out of your network, but they can't do anything with it because you've encrypted it or made it, useless in some way, again, you still win, right? So what we really want to do is start thinking about, how do we make it such that the bad guy has to be right at every single step along the way, and the good guys get multiple bites at the apple. That's really what we want to get to. And so if you start measuring success in that way, of how have we prevented the bad guy from achieving what they want or reducing its effectiveness, then that's a win.
And has that work on enabling that kind of liaison to happen, has it been as fast as you'd hoped? Has it been as easy as you might have imagined? Has it been harder? Can you just sort of characterize it a little bit for us?
Sure. I mean, I think that it turns out there's a reason why the cybersecurity industry has talked about information sharing for so long, and has not been as robust at doing it in an institutionalized, organized way, is because it's actually very difficult. It really requires a lot of thought about what kind of information you're sharing, under what conditions. It requires continuous activity and support and investment from those that are doing the sharing and the consuming to actually make it work. There are fewer legal barriers than there used to be, but there are still legal barriers that have to be understood and incorporated into your process in order to make the information sharing work. So what we've really seen over time is that I think I'll make a US baseball reference, but it's kind of the anti-field of dreams. Just because you connect it does not mean they will share. You actually have to put a lot of time and effort and attention into sharing to make it work and to make it be effective and useful for everybody participating. And I think that's one of the unspoken, unseen sort of parts of information sharing, because everybody agrees that it's good, right? That we want to do it. It's how does it actually fall in somebody's priorities, right? And to make sure that it actually is a priority for an organization and for people in those organizations, and not just a sort of other duty is assigned, right? Mm-hmm. And all of those things turn out to make it really challenging and move slower than we would like.
And to take us back to where we were, like before we were even having these conversations about information sharing post-breach or in the sort of wider landscape of cyber breaches, why did you think this kind of concerted action was necessary? What made you realize that it was necessary, that it would achieve, it would go a long way to helping with the sort of aftermath of a cyber breach? And what have you learned along the way that perhaps you weren't expecting about the cyber landscape?
I think a couple of things. One is that, really what we're trying to achieve with CTA is no individual company or organization has all the information that it would want to do its job. No single organization sees or is able to observe everything that's happening in cyberspace. And so the other flip side of it is the bad guys share information all the time. They're moving information rapidly and collaborate in some very sophisticated ways. And so part of what we realized is that from the defender side, if we really wanted to be able to do defense at scale, at speed, we needed to be sharing information as well. And the industry has always done this. There's always been, ad hoc groups and, sharing that occurs between companies based on individual relationships. But part of what we wanted to do with CTA was to provide an institutional framework, something that could endure past individual personalities, such that there was a formalized way to enable this sharing that could occur at an even bigger scale than was already happening. And so that's really the genesis for CTA. What I would say that what we've learned is that while no one really disagrees with this in principle, sort of how you fit this into a business model and how you show that return on investment, how you actually, calculate that and show that business value, that's actually really hard. And it takes a lot of work and time and attention to make that happen. And I think it just shows that it takes time. And CTA is now 5 years old as an organization, and we're really beginning to hit our stride in many ways. And it's taken that long to really get to that point, which shows that it's that time and investment thing that I come back to over and over again.
That's super. That's really fascinating. You talked there about the sort of formalized landscape for sharing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like, who you're working with, what kind of stakeholders are at the table when you're having these conversations, who's invited to join this conversation?
So from a membership standpoint, CTA members are anybody that provides cybersecurity, right, to other people, that collects information about cyber threats and is willing to share it. That's our membership base. And really, currently we have about 34 members from headquartered in 11 different countries around the world. And in addition to those that are members, that are companies, and generally they're for-profit companies that are CTA members. In addition to those members, we have partnerships with a number of different organizations that are nonprofits or other types of or government agencies, where we have agreements to share at least human scale information back and forth. And to keep each other aware of what's going on and to be ready to respond to incidents together. So really it's that membership and partnership network that we've built up that is really about enabling all of that mission that I was talking about. But really we try to be a very open and inclusive organization for anybody that is working to protect the cybersecurity ecosystem.
And tell me a little bit more about that ROI, because I think we'll probably get some questions on this from the audience at the end. How do you prove that ROI? Is it simply in terms of, look, we think we have achieved X objective against future cyber breach? I mean, how can you sort of encapsulate how you might sort of portray that ROI, present that ROI back to your team, to your organization, so that you know that your efforts are well spent?
Yeah, I mean, there's several different ways that you could think about it, right? I mean, one is like if you're able to avoid a breach, right, that you can have cost avoidance. That's the most common kind, right? Of breaches and other kinds of cybersecurity incidents are not free, right? They take, even if they don't end up costing direct money, right? They end up costing you in terms of time and attention and other things that could be put to more productive use. And so if you can look at some of those based on data, either from your own company or from others that are similarly situated, you can begin to calculate sort of the expected value of that cost avoidance. But there's also sort of a direct return by, becoming more competitive, right? If you as a company have access to more information that's based on a broader base, a broader insight across the community, you're going to be more effective at serving your customers and clients. And that's going to have a direct return on your profits, right? On your revenue and therefore your profits. And so it's really about sort of connecting those things. Now, you're never going to be able to price out information sharing the same way that you can a manufacturing process. It's never going to be that precise. But that doesn't mean you can't put some quantitative data to back up the qualitative activities. Another way of looking at it is like sort of what is the relative net new that you get from a sharing organization? Information that you didn't know before. And when you get to be a very large size, that net new is hard to find, right? And even though I firmly believe that no one sees everything, still finding new sources, right, can be challenging. And so do you actually expand that aperture to encompass more information? And that's another way to look at the return on investment. So really, and then I would also say it's like, how much effort do you actually have to put into understanding and processing and dealing with that information, right? The easier it is to consume, the faster it is to consume. Again, that's a value to you.
So let's talk about then the mindsets needed to be comfortable with that kind of information sharing rather than closing in, in the event of a breach. What shift in mindsets needed from organizations to get really where they're comfortable sharing in the right ways to the right people? And if everyone was doing that, how would it change the threat landscape, do you think?
Sure. I mean, I talk a lot about mindset, just even from cybersecurity in general, right? Of not just in the context of you've already had a breach, but even before you have one, right? That the truth is that cybersecurity is not a problem that you can solve. It is not a purely technical issue that you can buy a my term for the widget in cybersecurity is the snort flabulator. There's not the thing that you can just go buy from a vendor that you plug into your network and you're done. That's just not how cybersecurity works. Cyber threats pose a long-term risk to a company or an organization or a government agency. And so rather than thinking about it as a technical problem that you can solve, that you can, push to the geek in the server room that you hope you never actually have to talk to again, right? That it is a long-term risk that your organization has to manage. And you have to manage it not just from a technical standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, from a HR standpoint, from a business operations standpoint. And so you really have to expand your mindset to think about cyber security in all of those different aspects. And if you start doing that, if you really realize that you can apply not just technical tools, but policy and organizational tools and, behavioral tools to the problem, it actually also expands the aperture of the solutions when they're not really solutions, but the mitigations that you have to it. And by broadening that out, you actually make the problem more tractable. And in many cases, for a lot of organizations, it's not so much about buying new technology, right? It's about organizing the technology they have. It's about making better use of the technology they have. It's about engaging their workforce in different ways and understanding how the cybersecurity fits in with their business model. The same thing is true. We come back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, that if you do suffer a cyber incident or a breach of some kind, when that happens to you, you have to then also include all those non-technical aspects in the discussion. And so, and in the planning for what you do after that. And so all of those aspects have to come together. And I think really that fundamental mind shift of thinking about cybersecurity, not just as a technical problem, but as really a business problem, as a human behavior problem, and really thinking about all the different tools that you have to address those issues and then managing it like a long-term risk, like that puts you in a much better position to deal with cybersecurity over the long run.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're talking very holistically about how you deal collaboratively with the threat landscape here, but you said something there which was make better use of the technology you have. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So, a lot of times, companies have lots of technology that they've bought over time, that they employ in their networks. And a lot of times that technology does not necessarily connect or play well together, right? And so some of this is about figuring out what cybersecurity technology you already have in place, and are we using it to its maximum capability, right? Where do we have overlaps? Where do we have gaps in our technology? And so really figuring out how to maximize the investment that you've already made on that technology is really important. And also, if you're looking at new technology, right, bringing in something new, what are you also considering getting rid of? What functionality does it replace, right? So that complexity is really part of the enemy here. And the bad guys really exploit the seams and those cracks and those overlaps and underlaps between cybersecurity products and processes. That's where the bad guys are looking to exploit your organization.
Okay, now we've talked about collaborative efforts here, but we are seeing more talk of efforts to impose a regulatory structure on the sort of disclosure of cyber breaches. Is it needed, and how likely is it to be successful?
Well, recently here in the U.S., the U.S. Congress has passed a law, and it was part of a package that President Biden signed that now is going to require those companies that provide critical infrastructure services to report on cybersecurity incidents and ransomware payments, to the federal government, and to do that within a very rapid, time period. And I do actually think that that was necessary because it was pretty obvious from the kind of reporting and the data that the government could release that they were not getting information on a lot of the cybersecurity incidents that were happening out in the economy. And if you want to make good decisions about resource allocations, where should the FBI, for example, allocate its time and resources to be most effective? Where should the US intelligence community focus its work? Where does the Department of Homeland Security need to put its dollars in order to best provide its role as, protecting critical infrastructure? If you want to make any of those prioritization decisions, you really have to have good information about what kind of incidents are occurring, who are they to whom are they occurring, how frequently, and all of that kind of data is really necessary to make those kinds of decisions. And it was pretty clear that the purely voluntary approach to that was not getting sufficient information to the federal government. And so I think that's a really important step forward to actually have that kind of cybersecurity reporting and incident reporting. I think the thing that many companies worry about, right, is that liability question of, are they going to then be, is it then the federal government then going to turn around and hit them with regulatory penalties, or are they going to be liable, from whether it's shareholders or customers or things like that? And I think this is where the next piece of this is really, really working hard to identify that standard of care. What do we actually expect is a reasonable amount of cybersecurity and cybersecurity effort that individual organizations put into protecting themselves and the data that they hold? And those expectations can be different for different companies, right? You're going to expect more out of a very, very large bank or a major hospital chain or a big energy company than you are out of a local chain of flower shops, right? Those expectations are just going to be different, and they should be different. And I think, but really working on that standard of care so that companies know what that standard that they need to reach is, what is that reasonable standard? And that will help address a lot of these liability and regulatory concerns, because then companies will know what they're managing to and what they need to achieve. And it's hard. Those questions are not easy, and there's always going to be some level of subjectivity to that. And inevitably, like many things, there will always still be those that want to Monday morning quarterback the situation. But I think having those standards would be really important to addressing a lot of those company concerns.
And let's talk about the key person here, the CISO, and, just sort of taking into account everything we've just talked about: collaboration, information sharing, talking to the stakeholders within an organization, but sort of more broadly, and also participating in those regulatory efforts as they happen, to ensure that you're sort of being sort of fully frank with the people that need the information. Are CISOs speaking the right language to other stakeholders, the people who are intrinsically involved as soon as a breach happens? So, legal, HR, communications, shareholders, and, in sort of increasing scale, the regulatory agencies who will get involved with this.
I think it's actually one of those things that makes the CISO job really so hard. Because the truth is, to be effective in that role, you need to have the facility and the capability to really understand the technical aspects of an organization, and to speak and understand the technology with those that are actually working with it at the front lines. But then you also have to be able to translate that into the language of the other parts of the organization. And you really have to be able to speak in business terms to the C-suite, the rest of the C-suite, for example, in an organization. You need to be able to talk about how it fits in with the business operations and how that the security aspects actually work with people, and be able to explain in layman's terms, in many cases, what's going on and why those investments are important and what they gain for the company and how it actually operates. It makes it a very tough job. And I think more CISOs really need to gain that facility to think about how they translate the technical side of what they do into the business language, into the language of risk, into the language of management and long-term thinking about risk. And that's a tall order, and that's not what we've trained or hired a lot of CISOs to do. But it turns out that that's a really important part of being a really good CISO, and really having those communication skills. And like I said, that's one of the reasons it makes it such a tough sort of position in many organizations, is because those are some divergent skill sets in many ways. And bringing them together in the same person is often challenging, but it's really, that's what that role is all about.
Well, let's talk about skills for a second, because I always ask this question when we're talking about cyber, which is there a skill set shortage in the cyber landscape? And by that, I often mean, do we have the right kinds of technologists? Are they staying one step ahead of the hackers? Do we have that kind of diversity of skills? And are we as familiar with the hackers as we should be? But from everything you've said, there could be skills that are more about communications and information sharing as well. How would you evaluate that? Is there a skills set shortage beyond technology in the cyber landscape?
Yes, I mean, that's the short answer. I mean, there's definitely a skill shortage we need more technologists, right? We need more people who can put hands on keyboard, and we need more diverse people in that technology space, right? That think differently, that have different backgrounds and different perspectives, to bring that to the technology discussions. But we also have a skill shortage in, lawyers that understand cybersecurity, and bringing in human behavioral aspects, and economists that actually think about the economics of cybersecurity and how that works. We even have a shortage of, I would say, like the creative types, how we talk about cybersecurity. How do we communicate cybersecurity? I always say that the imagery that cybersecurity has is often pretty lousy. Like, it's mostly like pictures of dudes in hoodies and like little arrows going back and forth at each other. And like, we need better imagery even to communicate with people about cybersecurity. So there's a shortage across the board in this area still that we really need to fill to have a shot at thwarting the bad guys.
Incredibly interesting, right? Our audience needs to get hiring, clearly. Michael, thank you so much for this super insightful interview. I'm going to say goodbye for now, but we'll see you back here in a few moments when we will take questions from our audience.
Yep, thank you.
So for this next session, I'd like to invite Gary Sockrider, Director of Security Technologists for NETSCOUT, for a rapid fire session on securing your data. Gary, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So, Gary, a long one to start with. The idea that cybersecurity starts and ends with keeping attackers out of our networks is changing. And it's clear that the ever-expanding network will always have vulnerabilities, and that attackers can exploit those to get in, as Michael was just saying. But for business leaders who are trying to change their security strategy and focus on preventing attackers from achieving their goals post-breach, whatever those goals might be, right? And Michael was just saying those can be multiple things. Where should they start? Can you talk about some of the tools and tactics they need to familiarize themselves with to properly direct their security teams?
Of course. Look, you've absolutely identified both the challenge and the opportunity that we see. Over the course of decades, technology has evolved, and we've all been so focused on keeping bad things out of our networks, right? It's all about prevention. If you look at where most security technology is deployed, we want to stop. And you hear, I know Michael mentioned this earlier. The bad guys only have to get it right once, and the good guys have to get it right every time, right? And we want to turn that around. Well, where we see the most opportunity is in the network itself. So we've done all this protection on the perimeter, we've done protections on the endpoints, but the network itself is critical. The network is the transit for everything. Nothing no cyber incidents are going to be successful without transiting the network, right? So we think that is an incredible opportunity that we're laser focused on. We've got to get that visibility into the data as it traverses the network. And we want to be very granular. We want to use packet data. So, many technologies deployed today, they look at logs, they look at, NetFlow or sample data or, subsets. We're relying on imperfect information. We're relying on incomplete information. So we really feel strongly that looking at the packet data, getting all of the data and making sure we're not missing anything as it traverses the network, that we're looking at all those critical points and capturing the information so that we can look at it. And then of course, beyond that, it's enabling that taking that information and enabling the end users or the security specialists to be able to analyze that in real time. So not just, seeing that information, but providing it actionable intelligence. So, we look at the incidents, we look at the indicators of compromise, we look at any information we have, we do real-time analysis of the incidents that are happening. We look at things that are happening across the global internet. So we have global sensors looking at that. So it's not just about your network, but it's about what's happening on the internet, what's happening on everybody else's network, and then pulling that all together into information that can be used, that can be actually utilized, to get to stop the bad guys, right? To put an end to this. So that's really the goal.
So let's talk about that data quickly. You're saying that packet data holds more answers than data that some other tool types use. Tell us, for those who don't know, what is packet data and why aren't these other tools using it?
Well, that's a great question. Look, packet data, capturing every packet that traverses the network is incredibly challenging. And fortunately, NETSCOUT has spent 35 years, more than 35 years actually, perfecting this technology. So we understand this. We are laser focused on the technology to not just be able to capture those packets, but then process that in real time using, indexing. We've got a lot of patented technology around this to be able to turn that into what we call smart data, right? So that's basically taking the packet data, doing the capture, storing that for long-term and investigation and analysis as is needed, but also turning that into metadata and doing that very, very quickly, essentially in real time, so that you have access to it and you can use it. Almost every other company on the planet, and certainly in the security space, companies have given up on packet data. They use sampling, they use logs, they use, any other method because they can't keep up with the task. And so really we feel like, staying focused, maintaining that integrity, having all of the data available to be able to not only see it when an event is happening, but also go back and investigate after an event has happened is critical. Michael mentioned this as well, and I know you talked about it too. Just because someone breaches your perimeter doesn't mean that they've succeeded in their efforts, right? And we know that this happens. We know that we try to protect the perimeter, but things get through anyway, right? Breaches happen. They happen all the time. They happen every single day. So what is really critical here is talking about mitigating that risk, mitigating the actual attack. So, it doesn't matter if somebody gets in. What matters is if they hurt you. Do they take your critical information? Do they get your customer data? Do they get credit card numbers? Do they get, private information? Do they get your source code? Whatever it is that is of value to your organization. So having that ability to see it and to stop it and then to go back and investigate, that is critical, and that's what we're laser focused on.
Well, Michael talked about the importance of information sharing as the key to the effective defense against cyber adversaries, against the bad guys. But if these tools are all using different data sources, as you've just described, how can they effectively work together?
Well, that's a great question, and it's absolutely critical. Look, there are a lot of technologies available that we are leveraging and that others are leveraging, but the ultimate answer is we do have to work together. And this information sharing goes beyond just human interaction, but it's machine learning. It's putting this data into a format that can be used by other solutions, by other applications. It's working with standards, working with partners. So, we have strategic partnerships with lots of organizations. Just to name a few: Amazon, Palo Alto, Splunk, many more. But the goal here is to be an integral part of the solution without trying to be a one-stop solution, right? We all know that there are many, many, many solutions in a security stack for an organization. If you're going to defend your network, if you're going to protect your network, you can't rely on any one company. You can't rely on any one technology or solution. And so we think it's critical that these solutions work together and work together in a way that increases the productivity of the individuals, of the humans that are doing this work. And so I think in the end, it's all about collaboration and sharing.
Well, just quickly staying with this theme, and I asked it of Michael, and I will ask it of you, what mindsets should be encouraged when we're thinking about information sharing after a breach to get us to that place where we really need to be?
Well, I think it's really, as you said, it's about the mindset, right? It's understanding that we're all stronger together. The bad guys share, as Michael mentioned, they share everything, right? They find out an exploit, a breach, a vulnerability, a weakness in a network or an organization, they're going to share it. And we have to have that same mindset. We have to make sure that we're sharing everything in real time in a way that is going to be useful to all of us.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for this. I'm going to bring you right back up, both of you, in a second for audience questions. So thank you to our audience. I can see that you've been very active on the question panel already, and we're going to take time to take your questions. And these guys have a ton of experience, so please make the most of your chance to ask what you need. If you haven't submitted and you still have questions to ask, please use the box to the right hand of the video screen. And I'd like to bring back Michael and Gary now. Wonderful to have you back, guys. So we've had a busy session from the audience. I'm going to get through as many of these as I can in the remaining time we have left. So this is from Satish Shenoy. While humans can be a glue to hold things together and address the threat landscape, do you see automation, RPA, playing a role hand in hand with policy, governance, behavioral changes, the behavioral changes we need? And I think this is a question for you both, really, because you've both talked about mindsets and you've both talked about technology, but how do we bring automation into that? I'm going to come to you first, Michael.
Sure. So, I mean, I think in many ways, we have not really thought about automation in the right way. And there's large parts of the security process flow, right, that we need to automate more of. And we need to make really good use of automation to do the things that machines are really good at, right, which is looking through large amounts of data and processing it, right? And you want to only have the humans involved where you actually need human judgment. And so we do need to bring a lot more automation to this process. I mean, that's part of what CTA is premised on, of, sharing that information, not in Excel spreadsheets or PDFs or, things where you have to retype it, and that you need to exchange it in a standardized machine readable format and do that at a very high volume. And that is not a substitute for additional human work, but it really should complement it and enable the humans to spend more time working on the things that humans are good at and let the machines do what the machines are really good at.
Gary, same question to you, because you talked about data and, how do we bring together those different data sources? But there's the wider sense of automation here. How can that help to be the glue that holds things together?
Yeah, look, absolutely. To Michael's point, machines are great at processing data, doing it very quickly, much faster than we could ever do. And that's why we bring them to bear. I think that it is important to understand that automation is for augmenting humans. So we utilize the skill sets of the humans, which are, much more precious commodity. And obviously we have a great shortage of them, but bringing that automation to bear to get the right information in front of the humans so that they can make those decisions that are critical to solving the problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This next question is from Lauren States, who asks, what role does the government and regulators play in facilitating information sharing? We talked about this a little bit. And what are the nuances for a global organization, which I think is the killer part of this question, right? How do you respond to this? Michael, I'll come first to you again, but Gary, I'd love your take on this too.
Yeah, so I think obviously it's a big challenge. If you're a global company and you're operating in multiple different countries, then, you've got a lot of different regimes that you're trying to deal with. Whether it's privacy concerns, legal concerns, reporting concerns. And I think one of the things that as a global, as a policy community, one of the things that we want to work towards is more standardization across more countries about what incident reporting looks like and what those regulatory burdens are. We're never going to sync it up entirely because that's just the nature of the world that we live in, but we can do a better job of that. In my view, the goal of the government really here should be setting standards, setting those, helping to work with the private sector, not at odds with the private sector, but to bring together the private sector to really draw out what those best practices are and set those reasonable standards of behavior and activity that we want on cybersecurity. And then to enforce those, and then to actually take the fight to the bad guys and disrupt what the bad guys are doing, again, in concert with the private sector. That's really what we want the government to be doing. What's interesting is it's a very different kind of relationship with the private sector and the nonprofit sector than the government often has, because it's not just a regulator, it's not just a purchaser, but it's also a partner in the space. And so one of the things that I find fascinating is we often, certainly at least in the United States, and my experience with a lot of Western Europe is the same, that we don't even have the right language to talk about this relationship between the government and the private sector in this space. And we're reduced to, public-private partnership, which has become so overused that we don't even know what that term means anymore. Or it just sort of means everything to all people. And so, there's definitely more work to be done there.
Gary, your view on this same question, what the role is of governments and regulators in facilitating information sharing? And if I may add to that question, what role can a technology provider play in that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that government does play an important role. It's both a leadership role as well as, providing guidance, providing information, providing conduits for sharing that information, right? So I think that, the organizations have a role to play. We need to be connected. We need to be plugged in, understand who it is you need to talk to. There's a lot of regulatory compliance requirements, but those really should be more of a prompt. Where do we start, right? So we know that we have to report, we have to be paying attention, we have to have the information when it's requested by any entity, by any government, but we also know that that's not enough, that we have to do more. We have to provide, more information to our shareholders, to our board, to our, executives, to make sure that they understand what's happening and how to react. So I think that while the government plays a very important role, it really should be just an impetus for us to think about how can we do more, and what is just the base level that we're going to have to achieve.
Thank you for that. Next question is from John Coates from MSSI. Should all new employees go through a cybersecurity briefing during onboarding? I think the fast answer to this is yes, but I'd love to get your take, both of you, on what is the nuance here. How do you train your workforce in cybersecurity in a way that's appropriate, but also sufficiently hard-hitting? Gary, let's come to you first of all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Look, I think there's been so much emphasis on training employees and, getting awareness. I mean, even myself, I go through these annual trainings, understand, watch out for phishing attacks and, look for any malicious activity. If you get a note from the CEO saying, transfer some money or something along those lines, right? We've all heard these stories. But I think really more importantly, we need to understand that our employees are our allies here, and they are really our first line of defense, right? So every single person that works in an organization, we don't want to make them afraid to talk to us about anything that they, any nefarious activity or any mistakes that they made, right? If you are naming and shaming your employees for, clicking on a link, then they're going to be afraid to speak up the next time, right? So I think it's important to have that awareness and to make sure they understand the risks and how they can be a part. But also, I think it's important to reward those employees for good behavior and to make sure that they know that they are allies in this fight.
Michael, what's your view on this, given your earlier answer on the need to skill up wider talents in the cybersecurity landscape? Do you think this would encourage more talent to think more widely and sort of deeply about cyber as a potential career path?
Yeah, so I think in addition to what Gary was talking about, well, I totally agree that you need to make sure that it's not like you have some sort of zero tolerance policy for link clicking, right? I mean, that is totally the wrong message. And in fact, you probably want to reward people, if you find a security flaw, if you find what you think is a malicious link, you want to actually reward them for sharing that, right? You want to encourage that. I think the other piece is you want to explain, part of that cybersecurity training should be like, why do I have to have this pain in the butt multi-factor authentication? Like, what does that get us? Why do we do that as a company? Why does this thing that seems like it gets in my way actually benefit the company as a whole, right? And then to your point, really bring them into that conversation and make it clear that the employees are part of that cybersecurity effort. And then hopefully some of them will start to realize, wait a minute, I could also apply my skills that I have in this space, right? In ways, and I can actually contribute in some different ways about how to think about this. And I think it's really important to also keep that feedback loop between employees in the business operation and those that are in the security operations, because you want to make sure that both sides actually understand, both groups understand how the other's processes work, why they're doing what they're doing, so that you encourage that level of communication. Because a lot of times when I have seen organizations have conflict, it's because the different groups and sub-organizations within the organization are not communicating well about their priorities and needs. And there's usually a way to balance those out. So, I mean, while I think that security training is really important, it's actually way more. I mean, yes, the bit about like reinforcing the messages about being, suspicious of, strange messages and things like that, that's important. But it's also these other aspects of cybersecurity that need to be brought into those training programs.
Excellent. Well, Michael, let me stay with you because there's a question here for you from Eileen Blaustein. With regard to all the shortages of trained persons across the board, are you developing training programs hosted or taught by your members to fill these gaps? And are you training facilitators?
So that's not really CTA's primary mission. There are organizations that are working on doing that, and certainly I would encourage our members to look at that. You know, there are different kinds of organizations out of different universities and things, in particular, other kinds of groups that work in that space. I think it's also really important to look at all the different sources that we have, right? You know, whether you're talking about, you know, younger people that are just now entering the workforce, but also current employees or people that are looking to move into different career fields. I mean, virtually all of the cybersecurity professionals that are around today started out in some other field, because if you're even close to my age, there wasn't cybersecurity as a discipline when we, you know, came out of college. And so I really think that we need to look across the board and look in some really different places too, not just a geographic diversity, right? I mean, you can do, one of the things the pandemic has taught us is you can do a lot of this work remotely. And so looking for people that live in different places than a lot of the traditional talent market. I think all of that is incredibly important. And then I think the last thing that I would say on this score is that while we very much need the really high end, you know, the computer science PhDs and the people that are really designing the really, really high end stuff, we also need a lot of people that don't necessarily have that degree of specialization, right? That are more just the generalists, that can really serve the, I'll switch metaphors and go to the, you know, the medical clinic idea that, you know, you don't need the really high-end doctors for every single cold that comes along, right? You need the nurse practitioners or the other things like that to have that in the cybersecurity field. So we really also need to be thinking about the different levels of skills that we need in different kinds of employees.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to try and get through two more questions, so I'm going to need really quick answers to these. How do you, this is definitely one for you, Gary, how do you effectively correlate, store, and manage packet data to understand or predict the internal threats? That's from Nanette Cutliff.
Yeah, well, look, you know, it's capturing the data in the first place is already a big enough of a challenge, right? But what we do is we process that, we take it, we turn it into metadata, we still store the packets, but then we take that metadata and then we apply, you know, algorithms, we use machine learning, artificial intelligence, we take indicators of compromise, known malware, you know, there's a long list, and I don't have time to even scratch the surface of it here, but processing that data so that we were providing it in the form of what we like to call actionable intelligence, right? So turning this into, you know, another phrase would be smart data, but basically giving you the things that you need to know that are most important so you can act on it. And that's really what it boils down to.
Brilliant, thank you. Last question, 30-second answers on this one. Increasingly, smaller businesses are targets for cyber attacks. They just don't have the same resources as larger companies. What advice would you give them? It's from Marie Sogabe. Let's come, Gary, first to you.
Yeah, look, there's, you know, obviously not every solution is going to be affordable to smaller companies, right? But there are providers. We partner with, you know, managed security service providers that can make this more, you know, you can outsource it. Basically, you can hire people. You don't have the staff. You know, they can do it for you, and then, you know, bring that price down and give you the appropriate protection for your business and to manage that risk.
Excellent. And Michael, same question.
Yes, and I would just build on what Gary was saying of, you know, it's really not about trying to keep it all in-house, just like a small business outsources things like, you know, accounting and other of its needs. You know, you're going to be looking for outside providers. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that for many small businesses, it's really about the basics. It's about very following those basic rules of, authentication and password management and link management and, keeping your software updated. Those are the basics. And if more small businesses really just embrace those, they would go a long way to improving and maintaining their cybersecurity.
Excellent. So much smart thinking here. I'm so sorry that we have to call it time, but Michael and Gary, thank you so much for sharing all of this. We really appreciate your time. And also a huge thank you to all of you watching and attending today, and for those excellent questions. Thank you to NETSCOUT for sponsoring this event. And you should see a survey link at the top right of your screen when you click on the bell icon for notifications. Please take a moment to share your thoughts, because we'd love to hear from you. And to everybody, have a great rest of your day.